February 13th, 1951. Night in Central Korea doesn't fall so much as it locks. It clamps down on the hills and the little crossroads village of Chipyong-ni until the whole valley becomes a sealed container. Snow crust, black tree lines, frozen rice paddies that crunch like broken glass under a boot. Up on the ridgelines, men in quilted cotton lie shoulder to shoulder in shallow scrapes, faces turned toward a bowl of darkness. They don't need binoculars to know what's inside that bowl. A perimeter, a trapped regimental combat team, a rule of war. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army has been exploiting for months. Cut the road, close the ring, attack at night. And the Americans will do what they have done before: pull out, unravel, run. In the Chinese headquarters maps, this is not a battle. It's arithmetic. Then from the valley comes the most insulting sound a commander can hear. Nothing. No engines starting. No long convoys trying to slip out. No frantic movement. Just a disciplined, deliberate quiet. As if the men inside the ring have accepted the geometry and decided to live inside it. A bugle shrieks. Another answers. And the night begins to move. The first wave rises out of the gullies and draws itself toward the wire, like a tide pulled by the moon. Boots crunch, breath smokes, dark figures gather, then thicken, then surge, fast, low, hard, carrying grenades, submachine guns, and the confidence of men who've seen perimeters fold before. They're still thinking about 1950. They're still thinking about a U.S. Army that broke apart on frozen roads, that ran gauntlets and lost whole columns in the confusion of retreat. They are about to meet 1951. Because inside Chipyong-ni, Colonel Paul Freeman has built something that doesn't behave like the old American habit of war. He has built a system, not a line, a ring designed to fire outward in every direction, with no rear to panic toward, no single escape route to clog with fear. The valley is shaped for defense, low ground hugged by hills, dominated by high features like Hill 397 to the south, and other knobs and ridges that look down into the bowl. Freeman has put his infantry along arcs like a clock face, 1st Battalion on the north, 3rd on the east, 2nd on the south, the French Battalion on the west. The Rangers and a reserve company sit close behind the northern arc, ready to plug holes before they can breathe. Between those arcs, mines, wire, and planned killing space. Not improvisation, planning. And behind that planning is a simple, brutal promise. We will not bug out. We will not turn this into another road-bound nightmare. If the enemy wants the crossroads, he has to come into the geometry and pay for every yard. The Chinese wave reaches the first trip flares. Light spits up from the snow like a flare of magnesium. Sudden white, harsh, unforgiving. And in that split second, the attackers see what they weren't expecting. They see muzzle flashes in disciplined patterns. Not scattered panic fire. Not a rear guard coughing in the dark. They see lanes. Interlocking machine gun fire that grazes the ground at chest height, laid out like invisible fences. Bullets stitch the cold air into a continuous sheet, and men who thought they were running into a frightened perimeter find themselves running into a machine that has already solved the problem of where they'll be. Then the heavier sounds arrive, a hard, metallic hammering that doesn't rattle like rifle fire, the anti-aircraft guns. Freeman's perimeter isn't just infantry and foxholes, it's combined arms squeezed into a tight circle. Field artillery, engineers, tanks, and, crucially, Battery B of the 82nd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion. Weapons meant to swat aircraft out of the sky are now pointed low, level, and merciless. Twin 40s, quad 50s. In daylight, those guns are intimidating. At night, inside a ring of illumination, they feel like law enforcement from another planet. Mechanical, tireless, unbothered by the weather or human will. The Chinese first wave hits the wire and the mind gaps. Momentum, their most precious resource, starts to leak away as bodies and fear and confusion bunch into obstacles. Leaders shout. Whistles pierce. More men pour forward to keep the wave moving. And that's when the perimeter begins to do what Freeman designed it to do. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't collapse. It answers. With prearranged artillery concentrations that drop where the attackers are most likely to assemble. With mortars that walk their rounds across approach routes. with machine guns that do not chase targets in the dark, because they do not need to. The targets are coming into the math. A Chinese commander watching from the ridge tries to understand the physics. The American line is supposed to be road-bound, supposed to fear encirclement, supposed to crack when cut off. Instead, this perimeter acts like it's anchored into the frozen earth. And here's the part that makes Chipyong-ni more than a firefight in the snow. Freeman did not choose this. He was ordered into it. 2 days earlier, as Chinese and North Korean forces slammed into UN lines around Hongsong, the situation in Central Korea began to shear apart. Units pulled back. Gaps widened. The word withdrawal started spreading again like an infection. It would have been the logical call to abandon Chipyong-ni. Freeman wanted to. Almond wanted to. Ruffner wanted to. The crossroads could be given up to preserve the force, to keep the line from being cut behind them. Then, Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway looked at the map and made a bet that would either save the 8th Army's moral backbone or snap it in half. Hold Chipyong-ni. Not because the village itself was sacred, because the idea was. Ridgway believed a disciplined unit, supported from the air, could absorb the Chinese night assault and keep fighting, inflicting a cost the attackers could not sustain, buying time for UN lines to stabilize and, most importantly, breaking the psychological spell of retreat. This was not romance, it was strategy. And the Chinese, looking down into the bowl on February 13th, don't see Ridgway's wager. They see a trapped regiment waiting to break. They throw more pressure at it. A second wave pushes into the same dark corridors, trying to find seams between units, trying to slip through the gaps where 2 battalions meet and a radio call might lag by seconds. This is what the PVA is good at. Night, infiltration, close assault. They are not stupid. They are not careless. They are working a method they have refined through months of success. But Chipyong-ni is not giving them the kind of night they want, because Freeman's perimeter is built to deny the seam. Engineers have turned gaps into problems. Wire, mines, covered by fire. Tanks are positioned not as escape vehicles, but as direct fire bunkers. Steel shapes dug in where they can rake the approaches. The anti-aircraft guns are placed where their flat trajectories can shred the natural routes attackers must use to get into the ring. And somewhere inside the perimeter, a tactical air control party and forward observers are doing something else that matters just as much as the guns. They are keeping the system coherent. The Chinese are listening for panic on the radio nets. They expect frantic calls, arguments, confusion. What they get is measured coordination, grid references, ammunition reports. Short commands that do not sound like men losing control of the night. That calm is not personality. It's architecture. It's what happens when a unit has decided, in advance, that it will not be driven into a road-bound stampede again. Hours grind by in brief violent spikes, bugles, whistles, shadowy movement, illumination, gunfire, then a lull, then another push. The Chinese have numbers. By U.S. estimates, tens of thousands are in the area, with the 39th Army and elements of the 40th and 42nd committed to crushing the ring. That weight matters. It always matters. But numbers only become power when they can be applied. And at Chipyong-ni, every application runs into a prepared answer. Somewhere around midnight, the Chinese change emphasis. They stop trying to batter the entire perimeter at once and begin hunting for what every attacker wants in a siege, the soft spot. They find movement on the Western Arc, different rhythm, different posture, the French battalion, volunteers, many hardened by previous wars, holding a slice of the ring with a style that doesn't quite match the American habit. Their commander, Raoul Magrin Verneret Monclar, has the kind of biography that sounds like propaganda until you remember the 20th century was full of men like him. A senior officer who accepted a demotion to fight on the line, because some wars make rank feel like a luxury. The Chinese push into that sector with the expectation that a multinational attachment must be the weak link, the seam where the ring will finally split. They do not get a seam, they get a counterpunch. In the dark, the French rise into the attack with bayonets and short violent discipline, not waiting to be swallowed by the wave, but stepping into it. For the Chinese soldiers, it is a shock. Not because bayonets are new, but because the enemy is choosing the same intimate range that Chinese night tactics usually exploit, the Western Arc holds. And when that attack fails, something changes on the ridgelines. Not the number of Chinese soldiers, not the cold, not the doctrine. the certainty. Because now the question is no longer, how do we break them? It's, why haven't they already broken? Dawn doesn't arrive with warmth. It arrives with color. Thin gray light that reveals the bowl still occupied, the ring still intact, the crossroads still denied. In siege warfare, surviving the first night should produce a defensive shrink. Pull back, tighten, conserve. Freeman does not shrink. He stabilizes. He redistributes. He prepares. But there's a truth inside the ring that no amount of discipline can delete. Ammunition is finite, and the Chinese are not done. Inside the command post, the conversations are not heroic. They are logistical. How long can the machine guns keep their lanes thick? How many illumination rounds are left for the mortars? How many artillery shells can be fired before the guns go quiet? Leadership begins to worry, not about courage, but about math. Radio calls go out from the regiment to division, then further, across the sea to logistics in Japan, because Ridgway's bet depends on one thing above all, that the perimeter can be fed. During the day of February 14th, poor weather delays some air activity. The Chinese stay low, resting, respecting what daylight can bring down from the sky. Freeman's men listen to the hills, and the hills listen back. Everyone knows the pattern. Night will return. And with night, the Chinese will come again, because a ring that holds once is an insult, and insults in war demand an answer. As evening approaches, the perimeter's most valuable resource begins to run out. Not courage, not will, light. Illumination rounds are low, and the valley without light is exactly the battlefield the Chinese want. Freeman's staff sends the urgent request, less like a plea, more like a system alert. If they can't keep the night visible, the wave can finally move the way it was designed to move. The temperature drops. Men press deeper into their holes, feeling the cold seep through gloves and into bone. Across the wire, in the ravines and gullies, the Chinese reorganize shattered assault groups into new ones, folding survivors into fresh formations, dragging mortars forward, checking satchel charges and grenades, rehearsing the approach routes in whispers. Bugles will come again. But tonight, the perimeter can't afford darkness. Somewhere far from Chipyong-ni, an engine starts, steady, piston-driven, not a jet, and begins to climb into the black Korean sky. And inside the ring, as the last daylight drains out of the valley, Freeman waits for one thing that will decide whether Ridgway's bet survives another night. A single, simple miracle of modern war. A plane carrying light. A plane carrying light. It sounds like a small thing, almost childish, like a lantern in a storm, until you hear it. A steady piston hum, low and patient, circling somewhere above the ridgeline where the black sky meets the black hills. Not a scream like a jet, not a roar like a bomber, just a mechanical heartbeat that refuses to go away. The men in the perimeter hear it and look up as if listening can make it appear faster. The men outside the wire hear it and feel something colder than the wind crawl up their backs, because that sound means the night is about to betray them. The first flare falls like a slow comet. Then another. Then another. Magnesium light blooms overhead with a hard white fury, too bright, too clean, hanging under parachutes and turning the valley into a stage. Snow becomes reflective. Shadows become sharp. The gullies and assembly areas the Chinese have been using as their invisible highways suddenly look like open streets. And in open streets, the perimeter's math gets easier. Machine guns don't have to guess. Mortar crews don't have to feel the direction of an attack. Tank gunners don't have to fire at sound. They can see. That is the first tactical theft of Chipyong-ni. The defenders steal the attacker's ownership of darkness, and the night, supposed to be the PVA's armor, becomes their exposure. On the ridges, Chinese officers try to restore the old rhythm. They push formations lower, into folds of ground, behind rice paddy berms, into any crease that might still hide them. They whisper orders. They wait for the flares to drift away. But the circling aircraft keeps feeding the sky, light after light after light. And every time the brightness swells, the perimeter answers with disciplined violence. Grazing lines of fire, short controlled bursts. Artillery concentrations dropped on likely approach routes, not frantic, not emotional, systemic. The Chinese attempt a new approach, smaller infiltration groups probing for seams, crawling, using the frozen paddies like a carpet. The aim is to get inside grenade range before the ring can pivot its guns. They get close. Close enough to hear American voices. Close enough to smell the bitter smoke from warming stoves and gun oil. And then the ground around them erupts, not in the random spray of panic, but in deliberate corrected bursts. Because Freeman's ring isn't blind even when it can't see. It has ears. Forward observers are listening, plotting, correcting. Mortars walk their rounds. Machine guns rake likely dead ground. Engineers have wired and mined the approaches so that close becomes stuck, and stuck becomes target. Somewhere in the middle of that, one of the perimeter's dirtiest little secrets shows itself. Field artillery is not only a distant thunder. It can be a close-range weapon when the situation is desperate enough. Guns that were meant to arc shells over miles drop their barrels lower and lower, firing direct. Huge blunt answers into the closest, densest shadows. It isn't elegant. It isn't pretty. It's what happens when a perimeter decides it will not be opened by force of will. The Chinese pull back again and again. And the most dangerous thing in warfare begins to settle into the minds of the attackers watching from the high ground. Doubt. Not doubt about bravery. They have bravery in abundance. Doubt about outcome. At some point before dawn, the ring holds long enough for the war to change keys. Because daylight is coming. And daylight belongs to the United Nations. The sun crawls up on February 14th like a harsh verdict. Thin, cold, merciless. And the Chinese are caught in the wrong posture for morning. Too close, too exposed, too committed. They retreat into folds of terrain, into ravines, behind ridges, anywhere the aircraft might not see them. Their doctrine expects this. Attack at night, vanish by day. But Chipyong-ni is not letting them vanish cleanly. As the light strengthens, the air over the valley begins to fill with a different kind of sound. Higher, angrier, predatory. The defenders inside the ring don't cheer. They don't have energy for cheering. They listen the way exhausted men listen for a door unlocking. Because this is the other half of Ridgway's wager. If you can keep a perimeter alive through the night, daylight brings you an entire second army. Aircraft don't need to take hills. They don't need to cross wire. They don't need to find seams. They only need to find movement. And movement, outside a perimeter, is exactly what the attackers must do if they want to reorganize for the next night. The Chinese know this. That's why they try to freeze themselves into the ground, to become part of the landscape. But the battlefield is now bright enough to betray even careful motion. And the defenders have something more than pilots overhead. They have coordination. Radio calls go up, markers go out, strikes come in. The Chinese are forced into an ugly choice: stay hidden and lose the initiative, or move and pay. Inside the ring, Freeman is watching the same truth from the opposite side. He knows the Chinese will not stop. He knows they will come again after dark. He knows, too, that his own perimeter is not an infinite machine. A ring burns resources the way a furnace burns air. Every flare, every burst, every artillery correction, every belt of ammunition is a little piece of time bought from a finite account. So February 14th becomes a day of tactical accounting. Ammunition status, sector reports, barrel changes, redistribution. The French battalion is steady on the West Arc. Infantry platoons rotate in foxholes where they can. Men swapping places with the awkward efficiency of bodies that have forgotten comfort. Anti-aircraft guns are re-registered for new approach angles. Tanks are nudged into better hold-down positions, their crews using shovels and frozen hands to carve the steel into the earth like anchors. And above all of it, above the ring, above the hills, above the anxious Chinese on the ridges, Freeman needs a lifeline. Because a perimeter that holds is impressive. A perimeter that keeps firing is undefeated. In mid-afternoon, the answer arrives not in the form of a heroic charge, but in the most modern thing imaginable. Logistics falling from the sky. Transport aircraft appear overhead, circling with a calm that feels insulting to the men watching from the slopes. Doors open. Parachutes bloom. Crates tumble into the valley. Ammunition, rations, medical supplies. The airdrop is not just resupply. It's a message written in physics. The ring is connected to a world the attackers cannot touch. For the Chinese outside, hungry and cold and dependent on what can be carried by men on foot, watching food and bullets drift down like weather, The psychological gap widens into something almost spiritual, not fear, resentment. And resentment is fuel. They scramble for what lands off course. They fight over crates. They pry open boxes that contain things they can use, and things that feel like mockery, items dropped because the defenders can afford excess. Inside the ring, the mood doesn't become joyful. It becomes focused. Because now Freeman knows he can pay for another night. But he also knows what the Chinese have learned. The ring is strongest where it expects the blow, and weakest where fatigue and habit create gaps. So Freeman does something that looks reckless on a map and feels terrifying on the ground. He starts moving his weight, not retreating, not shrinking, shifting. He strips less threatened arcs down toward their minimums. He drags heavy machine guns and automatic weapons toward the sector he believes will be hit again. Toward the ground the Chinese have already tasted, the place they came closest to cracking. He's gambling that the attackers, for all their adaptability, will still be drawn back to the same promise. If you almost broke the ring there once, you can break it there again. This is the chess match inside the gunfight. The Chinese, reorganizing in the gullies, are making their own brutal calculations. They have lost men. They have expended grenades, mortar rounds, stamina. Their units are mixing, survivors folded into ad hoc assault groups. Political officers press them back into shape. Commanders point at the map and say the same thing a different way. One more night, one more push. Break the ring before day steals the battlefield again. They decide to do what they always do when finesse fails. They mass. Not everywhere, at a point. The hills south of the perimeter, key terrain that looks down into the bowl and can cut into the command post area if taken. It's a place where a breakthrough would not just punch a hole, it would turn the ring into two disconnected halves. And they know this. If they can get inside the wire in strength, even briefly, the whole American system becomes vulnerable. Radios cut. Artillery overrun. Coordination shattered. The attack doesn't begin with bugles this time. It begins with weight. Thousands of boots moving under the snow's crust. Quiet clinks of metal. Murmured orders. The kind of sound you feel through the ground when you've been awake too long. Inside the ring, men press their helmets down and wait, staring at the dark beyond the wire, listening for the first telltale crack. Freeman is on the net, steady, sharp. Sector commanders report. Ammunition states are read like numbers in a ledger. The ring is tired, but it is still coherent. Then the night turns. Mortars open first, walking their explosions across the southern arc. Frozen earth spits upward. Trees snap. Dirt and snow sprinkle down into foxholes. Under that barrage, the Chinese rise. Not as scattered probing shadows now, but as a concentrated, determined push aimed at one promise. Overwhelm the southern hills, spill into the perimeter, and make the ring choke on its own confusion. They hit hard enough that for the first time the geometry shakes. A forward position buckles. A trench line becomes a violent tangle of movement and shouting. An American platoon is forced back, and for a moment the ring has a wound, a breach. The Chinese surge into it, expecting what their doctrine has always promised. Once the line is pierced, panic spreads. Units pull back to protect flanks. A retreat becomes contagious. But Chipyong-ni does not behave like the old war. The adjacent units don't fold away from the breach. They lean into it. They pivot their fires inward. They accept the risk of being hit from the side to keep the main arcs intact. They hold their primary positions like teeth clenched around a bite. And the ring, though wounded, refuses to unravel. The Chinese inside the wire run into something else they did not expect. Not soft rear troops, not a stampede, a reserve. Engineers, mechanics, headquarters men, anyone with a rifle, pulled into a tight, ugly blocking force that treats the breach like a doorway that must be jammed shut by bodies and steel. Tanks add their weight. Steel hulks firing into the mouth of the gap, turning it into a place no one wants to stand. The breach becomes a funnel where the attackers' numbers, instead of becoming power, become congestion. The Chinese momentum stalls. They have cracked the surface and discovered the structure underneath is not hollow. It's layered. They pull back to regroup. And this time, as the night drags into February 15th, the Chinese do something even more dangerous than massing troops. They harden their hearts. They start singing. Not because singing wins firefights, but because it welds courage into a shape that can walk into gunfire. The sound floats across the frozen ground, steady, mournful, defiant, and it lands inside the perimeter like a psychological probe. Somewhere in a foxhole, a machine gunner listens, checks his feed tray by touch, and says something quietly practical, something that isn't hatred or fear, something like work. The singing stops. The silence returns. And in that silence, the defenders hear a different sound, one that doesn't belong to the ring at all. A low, distant rumble from the south. Engines, heavy ones. Not the frantic starting of trucks, the measured, confident growl of armor moving up the road. Outside the wire, Chinese roadblocks tighten like fists. They have been built for this exact purpose. Keep relief away, keep the ring isolated, let the siege do its work. Inside the ring, Freeman hears the same rumor of sound and knows what it could mean. If that rumble is real, if a relief column is forcing its way up the last miles, then the Chinese have one final window to make the ring fail. And they know it too. So, in the moments before the last assault of the siege, the battlefield takes a breath. The attackers gather what they have left. The defenders pull every weapon into its final positions. And above the valley, the circling aircraft returns again, feeding the sky its harsh white fire. The night is about to be turned inside out, because the Chinese are coming one more time, straight into the brightest, densest kill zone Freeman can build. And somewhere down that southern road, a column of tanks is about to collide with the roadblocks like a battering ram. Two forces moving toward each other in the dark, and the ring, tired and burning ammunition like oxygen, has to hold just long enough to see which sound arrives first. The singing stops. It doesn't fade the way a camp song fades. It cuts, like someone closed a door. For a heartbeat, the valley is so quiet you can hear the cold working, ice tightening in the trees, snow settling, the faint clink of metal as men adjust their grips and try to keep fingers alive. Then the bugles return, sharp and thin, and the dark beyond the wire fills with motion. This time, the Chinese don't come in hesitant probes. They come like a verdict, a massed assault aimed at the same sore spot on the southern arc, the place that almost opened the ring the night before. Their doctrine is simple in its cruelty. If momentum didn't break the perimeter on night 1, then weight will break it on night 2. The ring will be forced to spend its ammunition, spend its strength, spend its cohesion, until it becomes a circle of exhausted men holding empty rifles. Inside the perimeter, Freeman has done what he can to make that math fail. He has shifted machine guns. He has dragged automatic weapons into the south until the sector feels heavy with barrels. He has pre-registered fires the way you preset a trap. This grid, then this one, then this one. Walking barrages like a fence that appears exactly where the enemy wants to run. It is defense as choreography. But choreography needs light. And the Chinese, feeling the flares above them, crawl forward anyway, using every fold of ground, every ditch, every rice paddy berm. They drag satchel charges. They bring more mortars close. They accept that casualties are the entry fee. They rise together, hundreds, then more. Bayonets glint in magnesium glare like a row of needles. They sprint the last yards hard, trying to outrun the perimeter's ability to aim, trying to make it personal, close enough that a machine gun becomes a club, and a grenade becomes an argument shouted into a foxhole. 30 yards, 20. And for a split second, it looks like the old logic might finally reassert itself. Like weight might finally pry the ring apart. Then the night itself changes shape. From inside the perimeter comes a sound you don't hear in open country unless something very large is waking up. A switch, a relay, a low mechanical click multiplied across several vehicles at once. And the world turns white. Searchlights, powerful beams mounted on armor, stab out across the snow and lock onto the charging formation. Not drifting overhead like flares, not soft or scattered, focused, horizontal daylight that doesn't just illuminate the attackers. It denies them their eyes. Men who have been living in darkness for hours lift hands instinctively. They blink hard. They hesitate, not from fear, but from biology. Pupils contracting, depth perception collapsing. The ground suddenly too bright to read. That hesitation is all the ring needs, because Freeman's defense isn't built around one weapon. It's built around timing, a cascade where one system hands the enemy to the next. The automatic weapons open, the quad 50s hammer in controlled arcs, not spraying wildly, not chasing shadows. The gunners can see the slope now, they can see the density. They cut lanes into it the way you cut brush with a scythe. Methodical, efficient, almost clinical. Riflemen fire in short bursts, conserving, aiming at silhouettes caught in hard light. Mortars thump behind them, dropping rounds into the assembly areas behind the wave, trying to stop the next push from even forming. Artillery answers too, shells cracking down on the approaches. Not as a dramatic wall of thunder, but as a practical denial. You don't get to regroup there, you don't get to breathe there, you don't get to build momentum there. The Chinese keep coming anyway, pushing bodies forward because doctrine tells them the perimeter must be cracking, must be thinning, must be close to empty. And then the ring bends, not breaks, bends. A section of the southern line wavers under sheer pressure. Grenades pop. Foxholes become hand-to-hand chaos in the dark edges where the light doesn't quite reach. A tank's engine revs as its crew tries to pivot the hull a few degrees for a better angle, digging treads into frozen ground. Freeman's reserve, engineers, mechanics, headquarters men, anyone who can hold a rifle, moves into the threatened sector like sand poured into a gap. It isn't pretty infantry work. It's close-range blocking, men firing from kneeling positions, passing ammunition hand to hand, forming a human plug backed by steel. This is where combined arms stops being a phrase and becomes a survival mechanism. The Chinese wave is no longer outside the ring trying to crush it. It is partly inside the wire, tangled in obstacles, caught between fixed positions and improvised blocks, trying to turn a breach into a doorway. And that doorway refuses to open. Searchlights swing again, tracking movement. Quad 50s shift their fire a few degrees. A tank fires into the mouth of the gap, not to chase attackers across the hillside, but to make the breach itself an impossible place to stand. The Chinese momentum, so terrifying when it stays coherent, starts to break into smaller, confused pockets. Pockets can be isolated. Pockets can be eliminated. That is what the perimeter was built to do. Out on the ridgeline, Chinese officers watch the southern assault stall, where it should have cascaded into collapse. Their doctrine expects the chain reaction. One unit gives ground, the next panics, the line unzips. But the ring doesn't unzip, it clenches. The defenders don't run from the breach, they aim at it. And as the assault wavers, another sound begins to intrude, faint at first, then unmistakable. From the south, engines, not the high whine of transport trucks. Heavy, slow, confident power, moving up the road like something with mass and purpose. Task Force Crombez. For days, the Chinese have treated the roads leading to Chipyong-ni like valves they can shut. Roadblocks, ambush positions, infantry with satchel charges, terrain exploited to funnel armor into kill zones. The theory is solid. Tanks can't fly, and the road is a narrow throat. Cut the throat, starve the ring. But Crombez is not bringing a polite relief effort. He is bringing a battering ram. 23 tanks, armor forced into a column because the terrain demands it, pushing forward with infantry and engineers riding where they can, dismounting to clear what must be cleared, then mounting again because time is the real enemy. Every minute the ring holds is another minute the relief column has to survive the gauntlet. The roadblocks are not imaginary, they are real. They cost time, they cost fuel, they cost nerves. But tanks have a kind of argument infantry can't always answer quickly. Weight and steel. They shove through obstacles. They smash apart hasty barriers. They fire into ridgelines that flash with muzzle fire. They keep moving not because it's safe, but because stopping is death by slow work. And the Chinese, focused on the final assault against the perimeter, suddenly face the nightmare inversion of their own siege logic. The attackers feel pressure from behind. They turn their heads and see silhouettes on the road, dark shapes, angular and huge, climbing into view like industrial animals. The relief column is in. The ring is no longer isolated. At Chipyong-ni, timing decides everything. The moment the Chinese realize armor has broken the roadblocks is the moment their assault loses its last advantage, certainty. What was meant to be a closed system, a sealed kill zone for a trapped regiment, becomes a two-sided trap. The Chinese force on the southern slopes is now caught between two fires, the fixed perimeter that won't move, and the moving guns of the relief column pushing in. The human wave, built to overwhelm one line at a time, suddenly has no clean direction to flow. It becomes a crowd in the wrong place under the wrong kind of attention. Small groups try to peel away into the hills. Others keep pressing forward out of momentum and habit. only to find the breach is still jammed with steel and men who refuse to yield. As the minutes pass, the Chinese assault breaks into fragments. Fragments can retreat, fragments can hide, but fragments cannot finish the job they came to do. The ring survives the second night, and when morning of February 15th arrives, pale, bitter, and bright, the truth is laid out in the simplest military language imaginable. The perimeter is intact, the crossroads still held. The relief column is inside. Men emerge from foxholes with stiff legs and soot-dark faces, eyes hollow from 2 nights of gunfire and cold. There is no victory dance. There is only the quiet, stunned realization that the thing everyone assumed would happen, collapse, didn't. Freeman, wounded and exhausted, has held command through the crisis, moving the pieces of his system even as the system shook. The French battalion holds its sector, not as a colorful footnote, but as a hard, essential part of the ring. The artillery is still there. The automatic weapons are still there. The tanks are still there. Scarred, dug in, engines ticking. And outside the perimeter, the hills that were supposed to be full of triumphant bugles are full of something else. Silence. Not because the Chinese lack courage, because they've just learned something that changes how a war feels. They have learned that encirclement is not a spell, it is a condition, and conditions can be endured if the unit inside the circle has discipline, combined arms, and a lifeline. Chipyong-ni becomes a pivot not because it was the largest battle, or the bloodiest, or the most glamorous. It becomes a pivot because it breaks a belief. For months, the Chinese had been watching UN forces pull back again and again, watching the idea of American invincibility turn into an image of columns on icy roads, moving south with fear at their heels. The doctrine they relied on was not only tactical, it was psychological. Surround them, frighten them, and they will undo themselves. At Chipyong-ni, the surrounded men refuse to provide that fear. They don't bull-bug out. They don't abandon their guns. They don't treat the ring as a trap. They treat it as a weapon. And when the war story reaches forward from that frozen valley, that's what matters most. Not the romance of last stands, the mechanics of a modern defense, the way illumination can steal the night, the way automatic weapons, artillery, armor, and air support, coordinated in a tight perimeter, can turn massed infantry into a problem that courage alone can't solve. And the way one decision, Ridgway's decision to hold, Freeman's decision to make the ring coherent, can change what an army believes about itself. The easy war ends at Chipyong-ni. After that, nothing is automatic. Every hill costs something. Every night becomes a contest, not a certainty. And somewhere in the frozen ground around that B-shaped valley, buried under churned snow and empty ammunition belts, lies the simplest lesson of the Cold War battlefield. Technology doesn't win by existing. It wins by being organized, by being held together in the dark, long enough for daylight to arrive.